Good morning. I've recently come into possession of this beautiful old Triumph. It's a 2001 Triumph Sprint ST 955i. And I've got a few jobs to do on it before it's at the point where I can register it and get it on the road. But just a little bit of background on the bike for me. If you know anything of the history of Triumph, the original company based at Merredin went out of business in the early 1980s. I think largely due to competition with Japanese bikes, which at that time, I think to be honest, were incorporating better technology and were being made cheaper, and the old Triumph couldn't put out and keep up with it. But Triumph sort of had a rebirth in the early 90s, sort of like a phoenix rising from the ashes, if you like. And this bike sort of stems from that period when Triumph came back into the world of motorcycles with a particularly British flavour and British flags everywhere over the bikes, unlike previous Triumphs, and came out with some outstanding motorcycles at the time that were more than competitive with their Japanese rivals. And I think at the time the Triumph factory in Hinckley was the most technologically advanced motorcycle factory in the world. So it was well ahead of the Japanese at the time. Not exactly sure where that was now. But at that time I was in my early 20s and happily zipping around on a Suzuki DR250, and I particularly remember this bike when it came out as being like a dream bike for me, but it was beyond my economic means at the time. I simply couldn't afford it, so it stayed at a distance. And it was certainly, Triumph brought out a range of bikes, but the 955i, you can't tell here, but I might put up some photos. In its full fairing is a beautiful bike, at least to my eyes. I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But for me, has a real sentimentality about it as the bike I wished I could have in my early 20s. And it was like a classic sports tourer. So when the opportunity to buy this bike came up now, at a very good price, I have to add, I jumped at it and I've grabbed this bike. However, it is a project bike. As you can see, I've got all the fairing off, lying on the pile on the ground over there, and the full frame and so forth, an engine is visible, and conspicuously also is the absence of any front end on the bike. And that's because one of the first jobs I'm working on here is a reconditioning of the forks. This bike, when I bought it, the fork seals were in absolutely pathetic condition. While I'm saying this, I might put up a couple of pictures to show you there's oil getting out everywhere, and badly needed some new oil seals and dust seals. The previous owner of this bike was the second owner. He'd had it since, the bike has done about 78,000 kilometres, and the previous owner bought it at about 30,000 kilometres. And I was encouraged to hear that about every 5k he changed oil and oil filters and checked coolant and everything like that. Well, he checked coolant more regularly, but was very diligent about changing oil. But he hadn't really done much else. He hadn't looked at the fork seals. He hadn't done any valve clearance checks and so forth. So given the price we negotiated on this bike, I thought it was a very good deal for me to pick up, sort of a nostalgic bike for me, do some of the work needed to get it back on the road. And it's very much for me a do it up and ride proposal here, not a do it up and sell. Anyway, the forks are off, as you can see, and one of the forks is currently disassembled and lying here in some degreaser. The other fork is lying there waiting for the same process. But essentially what I'm planning to do in these videos is to go through the process of reconditioning the forks. So, I mean, there's a couple of levels you could work at here. You could simply put in some better oil seals and change the fork oil. I figure at this case, what I'd like to do is take out all the components, check them all out thoroughly, replace anything that's needed, and of course put some good new fork oil into the bike, some new oil seals and dust seals, and hopefully pretty soon the front end will be perfect like it was when it rolled out of the factory. But look, I'll show you one thing here. If I can pull up on this one here. This is the fork oil I drained out of that fork that's currently sitting in the degreaser. It's disgusting is a very mild word in this case. Absolutely gluggy, black, and full of all sorts of worn metal and so forth. This is actually what some new fork oil should look like. It's out of my Motorex tub there of new oil. So yeah, I'm going to start with cleaning it up. I've got a new set of oil seals here, and we'll replace O-rings, crush washers. The crush washer in the bottom, plug and the bottom bolt on the damper rod is absolutely decimated, and there's all sorts of oil was leaking out of there. So for now, I hope you enjoy it. I mean, the video will be specific to a 2001 Triumph Sprint ST, but a lot of the elements and processes that you go through to recondition a fork or a pair of forks on a motorcycle will be very similar. So I hope some of you might find it useful. Sort of bit of my hobby to capture things I'm doing on video and share them anyway, so I'll get into it. Okay, well at this point I was actually going to launch straight into the technical side of reconditioning the forks, but you may or may not know I have two children in their mid-20s who are both pretty social media savvy, and neither of them are backwards in giving me critiques on my YouTube site, that's for sure. But one common critique they both had is my videos are too long. So what I've decided to do is to split this restoration project for the Triumph, this Triumph Phoenix from the Ashes project, up into a number of separate videos. So video 1 will be this one, which is basically just an introduction. On video 2 I'll move in and do the full reconditioning of the forks. On the third video I'll look at the brakes, so checking and changing brake pads, bleeding and changing the brake fluid. Video 4 I'll look at the oils, so engine oil, gearbox oil, all the filters, so oil filters, air filters and fuel filters, and I'll also look at the oil cooler, give that a bit of a service. Video 5 I'll look at the whole cooling system, coolant-based cooling system in this one, liquid-based. Video 6 I'll move on to the electrics, check and look at the spark plugs, or change the spark plugs no doubt. Heaven knows when the spark plugs were changed. Video 7 we'll get on to the valve clearances. I know they haven't been looked at even possibly since the bike was new. So do a valve clearance check and adjustment if necessary. On the 8th video I'll do a throttle body sync, so to get all the 3 cylinders running perfectly. Once again, my plan to make this thing like it rolled off the production line. Video 9 I'll look at the clutch and make an assessment about whether we need to change any pads there, and plates, sorry. And video 10 I'll look at the drivetrain, so assess the chain, the cush bearings in the rear wheel, and the front cog as well, check whether we need to replace anything or they're right to live for a little bit longer. And then the fun part, in the 11th video I'll do a road test and review. So I'm hoping each one of these videos will be sort of 6 to 8 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. But yeah, I'm going to follow the advice of my much more savvy children and try and keep my videos as short as possible. Okay, catch you later.